absolute pleasure to introduce Paul. Paul's a clinical social worker. He has been with us at Birchtree for 2 years, 3 years?
Between the two and a half.
Before that, I knew Paul from the sort of Yolom world. He's an incredibly, I think, I'm very biased, but incredibly gifted clinician, an excellent speaker. He's also the person that you can have these really difficult conversations with. And there's certainly been, for us at Birchtree, Paul has been the person that we could refer somebody who's a perpetrator to, or refer somebody with these problematic behaviours around sex and porn and addiction and those sorts of things. And so from our perspective, he is one of the few people in the industry who'll do this work. And so we're really, really grateful to you tonight that you're sharing your time with us to share your wisdom. And I'm going to be his little IT support person here and keep it interactive. So if you've got thoughts and questions along the way, I just really encourage you to write those down and keep them for the end. And the other thing that we always say is be here how you need to be here, so that you look after your nervous system, you look after your own well-being in listening to some of this really difficult content. So on that note, I'm going to get rid of that. And I'll hand over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Soph.
You're welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of my history and how I got into this. My first job working around this topic of sex was working during the AIDS crisis. And my first job was a volunteer with ACON. And I was walking around sex on premises venues, trying to recruit people to do qualitative research interviews for a possible HIV vaccine. So I was walking around with a great big AIDS t-shirt, walking up to people in venues.
In the act?
Sometimes in the act. And I had never been to one of those venues. And I had to start off with a very analytical lens to begin with. And to be completely frank with everybody, I was just sharing with you, Sophie, I actually did see a particular sex act on the first time that I went out. And I fainted for a bit and my co-worker had to pull me around. So this was not like an easy or wasn't an easy intro, but from there, I did qualitative research with women who were pregnant and found out about their HIV diagnosis when at that point in time, there were no good treatments on offer. From there, I went and worked with people with disabilities and worked in an organisation as not only a sex researcher, but also as a counsellor for clients within this organisation that wanted to explore their sexuality. I've worked with a whole range of different organisations after that, and then went on and did further studies and worked for 2.5 years in a clinical environment in a private hospital, doing men's programs, sex for men who had sexual compulsion and porn issues. Yeah. And now I'm here.
Now you're here.
Now I'm here. So that's it in a nutshell. So.
And Paul, you were saying that this sort of space around working with problematic sexual behaviours tends to kind of fall into two camps of people, and that you find yourself in the middle. Do you want to tell me what those two camps are?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of clinicians who come from a more religious base, so they're looking for a spiritual solution for clients, and there's this other space which is more around not pathologizing sex at all, and trying to help clients see that there's nothing wrong with their sexual thoughts or sexual behaviors. And I'm sitting more in the middle, so I'm looking at it more through a trauma lens, and also looking at it psychodynamically, working with clients going, well, what are these thoughts and behaviors that are upsetting, and where might they come from?
Awesome. Love it.
So that's where I sit in the landscape. And let's click on to the next slide. Right. Let's take it off. So this is what we're going to cover tonight. We're going to look at what sexual problems / disorders actually are and what defines healthy sexual behavior. We'll look at the dilemma of how we as professionals can provide treatment for clients without clear diagnoses, conceptualization or treatment guidelines, because there is no defined sexual compulsion disorder. So without that, and no one's even looked at porn. So there is no porn misuse disorder. These things don't actually exist. And how do we help clients with that? Discuss how attachment theories evolved into a developmental trauma theory, and along with other environmental influences, can inform self-defeating and self-hating beliefs that clients fuse into their erotic lives. We'll look at how trauma, particularly sexual trauma and PTSD, causes a hyperarousal of clients' limbic systems, and completely disrupts their capacity to regulate their emotions. And we look at this often through a more generalized lens of abuse, but we don't look at it through how it affects their erotic lives.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the same systems at play. We'll look at how neuroscience or respondent conditioning explains the physiological and biological mechanism of compulsive behaviors in general, and how sexual behaviors use that same limbic system. And so people can find themselves with problems compulsively acting out sexually, as you can with gambling, etc.
So it's the same pathways.
Same pathways.
Beautiful.
We'll look at how to assess a traumatized client's sexual history, their self-construct, what their ideas of themselves are, and to look for any comorbid disorders and how these may inform treatment strategies. We'll discuss how to provide a trauma-informed treatment for clients, assisting them to integrate cognitive and emotional experiences, enabling them to develop insight and control over their distressing sexual behaviors. The critical importance of focusing on developing a positive self-construct, self-esteem, will be explained, and how a more positive self-belief absolutely affects people's erotic and sexual lives. And the focus of treatment will be on assisting clients to develop sexual and erotic fantasies and behaviors that are egosyntonic with their improved self-identity. So a lot of the work from a trauma perspective is helping clients become more comfortable with intimacy.
Yep. Which is really what everyone needs after trauma, isn't it? Sexual trauma in particular as well.
Exactly. So it's just, this often is the we won't talk about area. But the treatment and the way we help clients is exactly the same for all the other traumas.
And I think clinically people can do all the kind of trauma work, but a lot of us clinicians who haven't had any training around the sexual dysfunction or other even just the sex end of things can sort of run away from having those conversations.
Totally.
So it's so great that you're doing this. I know I'm going to learn a lot.
We'll explore the common fears that therapists encounter when working with clients. And there are some real general fears, and with problematic sexual behaviors, and discuss strategies to manage these fears. And most importantly, reaffirm that this is really, really challenging work. And as clinicians, it's completely okay to say we don't want to do this. We can't treat everybody. We do have our limits, and I have my limits. There are certain clients which I will not see for my own, special reasons and my own well-being. So it's completely okay to step back and to really think about, as we go through all this work, through all this material, to think about where you sit in that and what you're okay with, and to refer on when you're not okay.
Absolutely.
We'll kick it off with, what the hell is sexual health? There is no strong definition of this. At one end, it's like, don't pathologize sex at all. And so sexual health is more in the disease model, like protecting yourself from disease and protecting your physical health from damage and so forth. And at the other end, you've got a more moralistic or traditional view of sexual health, which conforms to patriarchal belief systems or various religions. And so people are going to have very varied ideas on what sexual health is. So I'll share with you mine. Problematic sexual behaviors and thoughts are those that cause clients distress and or create a victim. And there's another part to it for me. Sexual behaviors and fantasies that are not manifested from a self-hating belief system. And so finally, sexual health, or a healthy erotic and sexual life, is conceivably not possible for those who eroticize self-hating beliefs. So everyone's going to have to sort of come to their own place regarding what good sexual health is, so that they can at least have a dialogue with clients with where they come from,
Yeah.
and to see if it matches what a client.
So you
where
have
a
to
client
work out
comes
as a
from.
clinician how comfortable you are with having this conversation with people, and also what your beliefs are
Totally.
as well. And I think the key thing around sexual health that I can see that you've brought up there is, you know, that the self-hating is such a key component of, you know, if that's tied into the eroticism, then that is really one of the major problems. Is that kind of...
My belief is that.
Sorry, yeah, that's what
yeah,
you're
no,
saying.
yeah. But I believe if we're coming from a place of really hating ourselves,
Yeah.
That's going to show up in our sexual lives. And so I would then pathologize that.
Whatever behaviors flow on,
Yeah.
if they're done from a self-hating perspective. That helps that sort of to narrow it down, not narrow it down, distill it down.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So everyone's going to have a different idea on this.
Yeah.
And it will inform how we treat clients.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Next slide.
Sorry,
Yep, you're right. So look, I've just put down here, you know, like we don't know what this is in terms of definition. I've given you my idea, but if as soon as you delve into this, you're going to find out that everybody has particular and often strong opinions and ideas on what problematic, if anything is problematic, sexual behavior actually is. And I'd just like to add that when it comes to porn, that there are no inclusions in the DSM at all, that it is not even considered a disorder, or you can actually do it compulsively. So it would have to go under unspecified addictions. Yeah. And that's about as good as it gets. But that's just highlighting the difficulties in getting to this place of defining what could be problematic.
Oh, he doesn't want to move on.
There we go. So the DSM did consider hypersexual disorder, but actually knocked it on the head, and it was taken away. And that was because of the two camps that I was speaking about before. And there was also another consideration, and that was the insurance companies. So if somebody has a sexual compulsion, they could be let off the hook for bad behavior or criminal behavior.
Yes, yeah.
And there was such a concern around that the whole thing went underground again.
Down.
So as it stands now, there is no inclusion. Over there.
Oh, no, it's really not liking us today. There we go.
Go there. Okay. And this is just giving more information of what I just said, basically. But there was a huge concern that the number of people diagnosed with a mental illness is increasing, and that this would just add to it, and that a lot of so-called hypersexual behavior could be more easily explained as obsessive compulsive disorder or impulse disorders. But it is really important to hold here that a lot of the problematic sexual behaviors that people have does involve a lot of ritualized planning and forward thinking. So that doesn't really capture it at all. Which
is like addiction, right? The ritualized planning and thinking about how you're going to get the drug or how you're going to get the thing that you're after. That's part of the diagnostic criteria.
So it really operationally looks more like an addiction. For most people.
And I wonder if that hypersexualized behavior, it's like, well, when is too much hypersexualized? Well, where's the kind of criteria? And then is it like however many times a day or however many times a week? Like there's such, and then we've got gender differences in that as well, because we're more comfortable with men being hypersexualized than we are with women. And there's a whole kind of role.
And there was a hell of a lot of pushback from the gay community as well, because their sexual behaviors are different again. So no one could agree.
Good.
So look, the World Health Organization, though, did come in with, and I've written it down here as CSPD, but that is compulsive sexual behavior disorder. So they've recognized it as an impulse control disorder, which I've already said doesn't really capture it at all. Not to say that some people don't have that experience, but it seems broader than that. And so they're trying to get a handle on what separates this behavior from other identified disorders that are already out there, and they haven't quite got there yet. Okay.
Ooh, my favorite, neuroscience.
That's okay. Look, really quickly, this is just looking at operant conditioning and how this process works in the brain. So, you know, the dopamine pathway is activated by salient survival-based stimuli. It's evolved to reward and encourage the organism to seek out activities for survival. And it gets overused and we end up in that addictive process. Yep, the same neurocircuitry involved in drug addiction is present in excessive porn use. Although debate still abounds regarding classification and diagnosis of sexuality disorders, they're often conceptualized through this addiction lens.
Yes, yeah.
Which is a narrow lens, and I'll talk more about the other side, which is the attachment theory lens.
Yeah,
so,
love it.
look, attachment theory is really, really evolved.
Will I move on?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, look, modern attachment theory really is conceptualized as an emotional theory. The emotional effects during the early months and years of development is critically dependent on a sensitive and respondent caregiver. And we're looking at attunement, and that determines a person's emotional well-being. So it's gone a lot from looking at looking at the behavioral or the biological interaction between a caregiver and a baby, and now looking at how a baby regulates their emotional system when that attunement isn't present.
Yeah.
And formulating or considering, or what I totally believe is that inability to regulate a person's system sort of underlies their capacity for intimacy and connection.
Absolutely.
And just to hold, because I think it's something to hold right through here, but people who struggle with this, who have what we call an insecure attachment, tend to have developed a really good capacity to have high arousal. So they have sat there not being attuned, and when they've, smiling and the smiling face hasn't been returned, and they've been able to take it up to a level and then hold their breath and then bring themselves back down. So just in that process being repeated thousands of times, whenever they are highly distressed, they can take their system right up much further than most people. So they have more capacity to arouse themselves and to tolerate it.
So they tolerate right up to the higher levels.
Yeah. And how that plays out in behaviors later, and sexual behaviors is really important. The research literature on trying to find out if there's a connection between people who have sexual compulsions or problems and attachment theory is really, really tricky, given that there are different attachment constructs out there. And so trying to cross-reference research between them is really, really hard. The best we can come with really in general terms is that secure and insecure attachment research has actually had an etiological link to trauma and to attachment theory to sexual behavior. I think the next two slides I've basically just elaborated on that further. So on this slide and on the next one, I just speak more about that. Okay, so secure attachment, really, an inner idea that you're not better or worse than other people. It shows up as an adult, a functional way of relating to people. An individual is comfortable with intimacy and autonomy, maintains a sense of worthiness or lovability, values relationships, thoughtful when discussing relationships.
And I think with secure attachment, you also have somebody expecting that relationships are reciprocal, they're going to be positive, that when you become into it with someone, no harm will be done, or if there's if the harm is like a misattunement or something along those lines, that repair will come. Totally. Like Ed Tronic's stuff about rupture repair, that the repair comes when there's been disengagement or dissonance in the attachment in the moment. So there's a sense of safety and reliability, security that will come, and that they're worth having that.
Absolutely, yeah. And look, I don't know what the stats are and how many people are securely attached.
There's 2 in the world.
62%.
No, yeah. So we love to say that John Breer says that 98% of people didn't get the parenting that they didn't get good enough parenting, and the other 2% are lying. So. I like, and really there's a whole kind of like another discourse around earned secure attachment, which is if you didn't get secure attachment in your childhood, but you've done enough of your own personal work where you can actually become, be earned secure within yourself in relation to yourself. That's a whole nother conversation.
Absolutely. But I think underneath it, it's that people have generally healthy self-esteem.
Yeah, and a sense of security.
That would be the cognitive thought, I reckon, with a secure attachment. Now a dismissive attachment, look, here we're looking often more at those cluster B narcissistic personality disorders, people who look good, who present well, generally feel that they're better than others.
Yep.
But they're not the one with the problem. They have restricted emotions, they avoid intimacy, maintain a sense of worthiness or lovability. Look, they're not clear when discussing the value of close relationships. So when you have conversations around what the relationship means to you or how do you feel in the relationship, it's unclear. They do evaluate others negatively quite quickly. They'll pull up where other people haven't met up to their expectations. And they do expect disappointment from others, strongly self-reliant. The preoccupied attachment presents more as that wounded pre-adolescence, longing, don't know how to do this, but I need this, want help, feel or experience themselves more often as a victim of their environment, have a need for acceptance, they idolize others, over-involved in relationships, have exaggerated emotionality, and an incoherence when discussing close relationships.
So what does that look like, an incoherence?
An incoherence is like, they mean the world to me. Without them, I'd die, I'd be lost. They mean absolutely everything. I must have them. I don't know what they think. It sort of jumps around.
Oh, yep.
And highly distressed sometimes when talking about any relationships that are important to them. Tends to strive for the acceptance of others as a means of attaining self-acceptance. So if the other person's pleased with them, they feel better about themselves.
I often think of this group as like really highly jealous, often like leaning towards jealousy or leaning towards insecurity when their partner, the idealized partner, gives their attention somewhere else.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also people swap and mix. So people can be more insecure within a relationship with somebody who's more, dismissive and avoidant. It can stir up this anxious style of relating that isn't prevalent in other areas of their lives. And sometimes you'll meet with them and it doesn't present. They seem quite secure. And it's not until you ask questions that are very about the relationship and how they're feeling within it. And it shows up there.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Look, the fearful attachment, this is that more adolescent screaming, lashing out, angry quite often. They avoid close relationships, they expect rejection, fears intimacy. This does show up more with PTSD as well, I've found. People who've experienced, prolonged complex trauma will often have a really fearful attachment style and also present like I'm okay and flip towards I need help and I'm better than others and can be, a fight within them. To try and discover their worthiness. So look, the different attachment styles on this page and on the next one too, I think I've just found some various research that has actually looked at any links between attachment style and problematic sexual behaviors or sexual compulsions, just to hold the weight or the importance of attachment and trauma in how people show up and what behaviors are happening for them. So we're looking at the neuroconditioning, the
sort of dopamine release, the mesolimbic
the
pathway.
addictive processes. Plus we're looking at this other side, how people, what their attachment style is like, how they learn to trust and
how they learn to do relationships,
how they learn to do intimacy. Look, this could be boiled down to an intimacy disorder, which all trauma could be.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
like, problems with intimacy,
Yep. Yep.
a style of relating. And I think it would be really helpful to consider that through this whole masterclass, actually. So, look, insecure attachment leads to a preoccupation and hyperarousal of the limbic system. So we've really looked at how if insecure attachment styles, really some of these people with insecure attachment style have learned to self-soothe and can really go to a heightened level of arousal and are quite comfortable in that. Far more comfortable than most people are. And that can propel ritualistic and compulsive behaviors as they try to regulate their aroused system.
So they'll sort of stay engaged with this hyper aroused system doing compulsive behaviours, is what you're saying, rather than maybe disengage and say, I've got to get out of here.
Yeah, they won't find it as unpleasant.
Yeah, right. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
They're more used to distress.
Yes. 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 They're absolutely.
They're better at it.
They're better at distress.
They're better at it. So look, I reckon everyone's all over this, but I did want to just include it, like a definition for trauma. And it's an emotional response to an event or accident that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope. To consider the powerlessness, a sense of powerlessness that diminishes their sense of self and ability to feel a full range of emotions and experiences. So this sense of powerlessness evokes the fight, flight, or freeze response. And trauma is often looked at or associated with the freeze response, which is more connected to the disassociation, which is what we often see showing up in our practice.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And just to hold here, but we all have it.
Absolutely.
That this isn't abnormal in any way.
Well, if it's in the human experience, it's normal.
Yeah,
if that's our body's way of responding and surviving, then in my world, that's normal.
And everyone does this in certain ways, and it's completely normative response and should be applauded.
Yeah,
it keeps us safe
and alive,
Absolutely. Whilst we're going through whatever we're going through.
Yeah,
and we're just really looking at where this is no longer working for people.
Absolutely,
that's all. If it's working, it's okay.
Yeah, beautiful.
And breaking it down into the types of trauma. Look, largely what I'll be discussing in a lot of this masterclass is complex trauma, which has the added horrible factor of the traumatic events are caused by a trusted caregiver in childhood. There's some of the symptoms of someone who is experiencing trauma, just to hold those and they're on the next page. But before we move to the next page, the two that the standout two that I'd like you to think about here is the sense of guilt or shame and the low self-esteem. Okay, yeah, and they're the last two on that page. And here's some literature that just links trauma and sexual trauma to compulsive sexual behaviors and disorders. Look, I suppose for the last 30 years, there've been various researchers that have looked at this, but it's very, very under-researched.
Is it, do you know why that is?
Because they don't have a clear criteria, what the categories are, do the traits best exemplify some other behavior, fear of pathologizing sexual behaviors, especially after the 70s and 80s and the liberation from
with contraception, pill,
all of that
stuff.
All of that. So they still haven't got a handle on it yet.
Makes it a tough space. I keep thinking about things like ethics as well, like how you get doing this sort of research through ethics, what journals you publish in as well. Like it's not going to go in the the Journal of Psychology, for example. So
it can get really, really hard
of different groups or populations to kind of consume this information. So
yep, absolutely. And the next page. Yep. Look, this is just more. So I've just given you more research that you might want to look at, looking at connections between trauma and sexual trauma to compulsive sexual behaviors. And look, working in this space, this isn't groundbreaking to consider.
No, not at all.
It's like A equals B.
Yeah. Yep.
But yet it's really, really hard to pin this down with good, solid research.
Yeah, absolutely.
It just is.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Soph. Look, shame. Look, can you go to the next slide for me?
Can.
Yeah, look, with no clear conceptualization or characterization of sexual compulsion as a disorder, research literature has identified self-hate and shame as a possible categorical trait that differentiates this behavior from other substance and process misuse disorders. Now, I know shame shows up everywhere. Like everywhere. And how do you then go the next step and say there is more shame in this population? But I'm putting that on the table.
Yeah.
But when it comes to sexual behaviors, there can be more shame than in other types of behaviors that people experience for a whole host of socio-political, historical reasons.
Shaming sex in general. Absolutely.
Yeah. But this is often the hidden in the closet. Let's not talk about area of people's lives where they, if there has been sexual abuse or they're acting out in a sexual way that makes them feel bad about themselves, that this can be absolutely excruciating. So there is like something quite particular about shame here, even though it's really, really hard to.
Well, I just keep thinking of the Judeo-Christian context around shaming sex and sexual behaviour, and a lot of the whole kind of space of the history that many of us are carrying with us.
Absolutely. And if you're going to work in this space, you'll see it in spades.
Yeah.
So although shame's everywhere, here you really see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So look, there's just more research that has come out. It's quite recent. The Weary and Shemeti Karoli-Bellu's research I found really, really interesting. They tried to look at all the different variables, seeing if anything fitted with hypersexual. They just came that if there was one thing that was going to differentiate this group, if you like, it was around shame. So. Okay, so the next bit, I'm just going to have a quick sip of water here. So this is conceptualizing sexual behavior and looking at it through the lens of whatever we're sexually attracted to or have sexual experiences about has to happen in our environment. So our experiences, we sexualize as we move along, and then we make we have yearnings and desires to repeat or add to something that's happened in the past. So that's how our sexual history develops. And early on in the 80s, the Love Map by John Monty was described as an internal guide to what humans find erotic, and compulsions and traumatic defenses were seen as dysfunctional attempts at intimacy, connection, and love, which is largely where we sit today.
In terms of the attachment stuff that you were talking about.
In terms of the attachment stuff, but calling it love doesn't really capture.
It's very 80s language.
It's very 80s.
It's very 70s, 80s language, the Love Map.
So then it moved to a more clinical view through a template, which Patrick Carnes, who has a very behavioralist addiction lens, he looked at it through, repeating a behavior, becoming desensitized to the behavior, and just
sort of getting more and more extreme in the behavior to get the same level of mesolimbic arousal.
Absolutely. So an example would be looking at, and it's quite common with porn.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Watching porn and you've watched it 20 times and now you're adding something else into it and adding something else. And 6 months later, you're looking at something going, why am I looking at this?
Yeah.
And it wasn't originally in your template evolved and developed as you became desensitized. And look, there's still a lot of merit to that. And it's a really important part in how we grow.
Well, the porn research actually suggests that that's exactly how porn is written. So you kind of got to, whoever's writing the porn actually has to push the envelope. And as everybody's becoming exposed to, like with gonzo porn and those sorts of things, that the next thing, and it has to get more and more extreme to capture people's attention. So the literature about porn consumption, not problematic porn, but in general, really supports this this version of kind of the the sort of like a desensitization, and so, or like an increased tolerance in some respects, if you were using like a drug addiction model, leading to a greater consumption and a more extreme consumption of types of sex. And there's a lot of, obviously, degradation of porn as well.
Heaps. We're going to go into the different types a little bit later, but yeah, absolutely. Just looking at it as a sexual template, you know, and it develops and grows. And porn's a great example of that.
Yeah.
Look, erotic scripts in the 80s, in the 90s, and in the 2000s was also used. Looking at it through a more cultural, social lens, trying to look for why a particular person finds particular emotions and behaviours arousing and so forth. And Morin, I think, did a really good idea of pulling it down together and looking for a theme. So taking the whole script and going, what's familiar here?
Yeah.
What's pulling through?
Oh, yeah.
So, excuse me. So that's the history of looking at our erotic lives and how we make sense of it. Look, the development of the erotic script. So children engage in positive sex play with peers, learn about what they find erotic and what others find erotic through complex interactions and negotiations that these games provide. Children learn and practice complex social courting skills. And sometimes these go terribly wrong. If there's humiliation, if there's aggression, if there's anger, the mind can transmute these emotions into erotic fuel. Children use these emotions for excitation and arousal. And as I spoke earlier, those with insecure attachment styles and trauma in their past have a great capacity to excite,
stay up there and tolerate staying up there.
Yeah, and they stop noticing how frightened or guilty or anxious they are, and they focus on the excitement.
Yeah,
and so they stop considering what is actually going on, and they're just aware of their aroused state. Through responding condition, they acquire stronger doses of fear, guilt, or anger to maintain the arousal. And these emotional erotic feelings happen to us all. The only choice that we've got, really, when we think about it, is limited to surrendering to them or to run away from these erotic desiring feelings. And the traumatic erotic scripts compel clients to act out unfulfilling destructive patterns that prevent intimacy and can perpetuate self-hating beliefs. So just to understand that, you know, I've given you the idea that this stuff happens through normal sex play, and this can involve adults, this can involve sexual abuse, this can morph out of what we would consider normative. Yeah. And to look at it through a normal, healthy lens, and then understand what would happen if other events are occurring in this. And to hold, it is normative for all of us to be aroused by, you know, anger, fear, revenge, humiliation, rejection. We're not all aroused by happy and joy. You know, we've all felt that bittersweet arousal of feeling inferior to those who strongly attract us and will regret us, reject us. The basketball captain at school, or the prom queen who, you know, glanced at us sideways once. And
so the Australian version's the footy player.
The footy player.
The
netball
goal attack.
And we've all thought, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough for that person. And felt arousal in that. Just to hold that everything, these so-called negative emotions, they have arousal in them as well. But it's completely normative. It really, the problem is when people really hate themselves and are carrying huge amounts of shame, and then they've got these experiences. It's a whole different ballgame.
So the rejection then connects to their self-hatred as opposed to just a difficult part of life.
Yeah, as opposed to, you know, I'll fantasize about this person who just called me a drop kick, who rejected me because I wasn't the right whatever. Wasn't tall enough, you know, and still hold a healthy self-esteem. You know, just to hold here that some people don't have that to begin with, and they get stuck in this.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's just that last point around sort of those who suffer most from their erotic script, or those who feel compelled to repeat them.
Yeah.
So is that like that trauma notion about having to go back to the traumatic state or going back to the traumatic event?
Absolutely. To either triumph over it in some regard, or to reinforce their badness, their guilt. So to feel the shame, or to triumph over the shame. And I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Awesome.
But look, types of common erotic scripts, when longing is the theme of eroticism and desire. So when we spoke about the attachment styles, this is the anxious one.
Okay, cool.
Right? People attracted to those who are unavailable, ambivalent, or the wrong sexual orientation, like deliberately can't have the married woman, the married man, the committed goal is the longing, and the source is incompatible with the goal. So they're actually aroused by what they can't have. And the arousal happened because they were rejected or couldn't have the love or the care from someone that they strongly needed, or from the groups at school. Look, a lot of this stuff I've found actually sits in school bullying.
School, school bullying. So the humiliation, shame, rejection at that really critical point of development when people really, really need to have their social peer group be their most important thing. Makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And without trying to put things into stereotypes, when a parent leaves the family system at that critical age, and then they're at school, and then they're obsessing for someone that will reject them, and then they experience a lot of bullying and a lot of rejection, and they stay in this. If I had this this better. Person, I'd triumph, I'd feel better, and they stay in this process. So longing, as a common theme, and very, very often connected to peer bullying, and very often connected to a mum or a dad leaving at that critical age of early adolescence.
Okay.
And lust without intimacy, the attachment style that's the more fearful and dismissive attachment styles we're looking at here, not trusting others, protecting themselves from by avoiding intimacy, strong capacity for emotional arousal, and strong excitation, as long as there's no connection, and objectifying others, and a strong need to feel powerful and loved and wanted. You'll often find this shows up too in some of the more narcissistic and antisocial personality constructs as well. Look, when anti-sexual environments are eroticized, I see this quite a bit actually, where people have grown up in strong religious environments, and they've engaged in sex play either of their own volition, or being forced, or being abused, any of those really, and they've felt such immense shame and terror that people will find out, or that they are intrinsically bad. So they walk through their life acting as if all is okay, holding this dark secret, and they become aroused by it, essentially. So it can come in two ways. They can have panic attacks whenever they feel sexual. They're so frightened of it. Or they compulsively repeat a specific behavior. It's generally got a lot of anger in it when they do that.
Can you give me an example?
So I'll try and, will I make it generic or talk about somebody and change a few things? All right, I've got someone in my mind. Is that okay?
Yeah, I love that.
We'll change a few things. So one particular client of mine's father was a minister, and he was the sex play with him and his siblings. He was actually held out of school, and they were homeschooled, and the sex play with him and his older siblings was abusive. He was the youngest of 5 boys. And he was raped, amongst other things. So it was quite significant. And he was straight. He was a straight man. And he'd been married and divorced twice. And when he was rejected by his father, he would go into this, I'm bad, and hate himself. And he would go and have gay sex, repeating the behavior which his brothers did to him, to feel the the shame and the worthlessness.
Yeah.
He also got something else out of it, but that was that after he did that, he would go and repent.
Right.
And in the repentance, he
yeah.
would be wrong, and I'm the wrong one. Can you now accept me? And he would get this brief moment of acceptance by dad or by his partner or by whoever he was going towards. And that was as close as he got to intimacy.
Intimacy.
That was it, that moment. He would do the whole thing to
Oh.
get that moment of going, I'm a bad person. Will you accept me? And
Wow.
if they did, he would feel the power for a moment of intimacy,
Yeah.
and then it would be gone. And then he would have to repeat the whole
Wow.
thing again.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and he came and he said, I'm not gay. And yet when I'm acting out with men in these ways.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's really important to believe clients. There's a little segue
100.
here, you know, not to come in with, you know, someone's
maybe you are
sexual behaviors or whatever, and they're going, but this doesn't work for me, or I don't feel that this is who I am. To just completely believe them.
100%.
And have a look with them.
Yeah.
You know, put the science goggles on and say, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Why doesn't it make sense?
What is going on here?
Yeah, why doesn't it make sense? And have a look with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the most validating thing we can do as clinicians in a trauma space in general is to believe our clients first and foremost.
Totally.
First and foremost. That's the number one premise.
Yeah. Yeah. And start from there. When family members are eroticized, and to hold that this is normal as well.
Yeah.
You know, normal sexual development.
Yeah.
It's when this goes wrong we're looking at here. So if you have this self-hating belief system, a really, really poor self-esteem, and you've had sexualized play with, you know, in the family, and it hasn't been resolved in as much as you feel immense shame and immense guilt, and you feel there's something wrong with you, and then this can be eroticized and play out as well. You know, and this is the scary one, right?
This is the one I think we all think about.
Yeah, this is the one where I have a glass of water, because this is the one we do all think about.
This is the one that's in the movie Secretary. This is the one that's in the
know. Look, and this really this stuff really matters now, because especially with, you know, the domestic violence narrative that's there, that everyone's like, it's in lights. Now we're looking at it.
Well, so one of the way that male psychiatrists in the 80s, and I am going to say male psychiatrists in the 80s, used to explain why women don't leave, because the question was always why women don't leave, not why do men keep perpetuating it when they say they won't. They actually said, oh, she fetishizes it and she loves it, and she loves being in the submissive position.
Yeah.
So this is a very common script.
It is a common script. So here we go. Look, you know, I'm not saying, I'm almost giving a disclaimer. Like, it's just such a horrible area to look at, but it's like, we've got to just dive in and look at it. Look, if this is distressing for people, step out for a bit, you know, step out for a little bit, and then come back.
Look after yourself.
Essentially, you know, we're looking at rejection and contempt from caregivers, you know, and clients who have, you know, poor social skills, essentially a lot of bullying, exclusion from peers, have suffered humiliation and rejection in sex play when they were growing up, and they were aroused by partners who are vulnerable and powerless. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of need for revenge. There's a lot of, I'm acting something out with my partner now to triumph over something that happened to me years ago. So we're looking at the erotic themes of revenge, humiliation, and being worshipped. This, of course, does show up in those cluster B personalities, with some narcissism traits, with some antisocial traits. But just to hold that this can happen with people who don't fall under the category of a personality disorder. But this sits in the background. This is their private life, that if it's ego dystonic and they're not happy about it, but this comes out when they're raging. So there, for all intensive purposes, they look quite good, and they have shame and guilt around this stuff. But when they're feeling entitled and they're angry, it comes up. And when self-hate is an important theme in the arousal script, when low self-esteem fuses with high arousal, the results of a most destructive of all turn-ons. Profound negative beliefs are eroticized and exciting and make the client feel worthless. People who reinforce their self-contempt are the worthy objects of their desire. And this plays out in class, race, sexual orientation, patriarchy, power dynamics. So it's pretty easy to see how this plays out. Developmental sex play occurs during atmospheres of, rejection and ostracism, and a dysregulated, excited arousal system so extreme that they stop awareness of how frightened or anxious they are, and they just focus on the erotic desire. So it does work both ways. Either the object of the desire makes me feel worthless, or I make them feel worthless. So
do people switch between the two?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So absolutely they do switch between the two. You'll often find that people will find a partner. It's intimacy, such a weird word to use here, but someone that they have as it's not intimate, but a partner where if you like, there's a unsaid agreement between the two where, in this arrangement, I'll do this and then you'll do that. And then it plays out in different ways with different people.
Yes. Yeah.
Look, this gets into really tricky stuff too, because we're looking at BDSM and we're looking at consent, and we're looking at people saying, I like to be humiliated, I want to be submissive, it's my choice, stop pathologizing me. And I am going underneath this and looking at where and why and how and what's arousing in this. And then just holding that if somebody's self-esteem is really, really poor and there's a lot of self-hatred, that I'm holding that that's not healthy behavior. But I'm totally up for somebody else with me going, I get that, and yet this is how I heal myself. And this is just an area where I might disagree with someone. I'm holding here that, when self-hate is an important theme in the arousal script, it basically prevents clients from improving their self-esteem.
Well, and it prevents closeness, intimacy, human connection,
Absolutely.
Ventral vagal states, right?
Absolutely. So, and some people will say to you, but this is where I triumph. So by being a submissive, by being abused in a specific way after having been sexually abused, they'll say to me, but this is, I'm actually triumphing because I'm in charge and I'm experiencing pleasure. And so this time I've got some power and I'm healing myself. And it's not for me to look at someone and go, that's not right. But I can hold it and say to them, I don't think that's what's the driver of helping you feel better about yourself. And then we can disagree and I can work with them.
Absolutely.
We can just disagree.
Hold two minds in the room at one time.
Totally. Okay, so look, this one's again almost, I was going to say, if you want to leave the room for a moment, leave the room. We're getting into dicey territory again.
Shut your video.
It's going to happen occasionally, right?
This is a tough space.
This is a tough one, right? So watching the porn fantasy with a client can give you a remarkable opportunity to gain insight into the client's erotic script. It offers the client an opportunity to experience their fantasy while not being highly aroused and disassociative, and enables the client to integrate their cognitive abilities and short circuit the arousing, erotic, compelling features of the fantasy. And in my experience, clients have quickly developed self-compassion and improvements in their esteem and a decrease in compulsive thoughts and behaviors. It's incredibly confronting and challenging, and precautions need to be put in place. So I'll go through all of those.
Beautiful. I was about to say, what are the precautions? So let's move on.
Look, trust and safety in the relationship. So this is not something that you would do in the assessment stage ever.
Well, session 2.
Ever. A clear understanding of the purpose of the exercise and the experiment, which is to see if it decreases the compulsion and the arousal, and see if they have a changed perspective of their sexual desires, to see if anything changes or moves. For instance, I've put this in, imagine, watching with a client an incident of domestic violence, and they're telling you that they it wasn't so bad. They're either minimalizing it, or somehow they were at fault. They did something wrong, or they were a party to this in some way. If you could actually go, really, look what's happening here. And it has a completely different, it cuts through that, not only the cognitive distortions, but that disassociative arousal.
Yeah. And do you think part of that process is they're holding in mind that you're there with them, and they're holding in mind what your mind is doing as you watch it as
Absolutely.
well? And so then they get that dual processing kind of experience where they've got their own thing going and they're holding another perspective at the same time as they're doing that.
Absolutely. They're thinking about what I'm thinking. And I'm just putting forward here the particular case study of this client of mine. We'll call him Muhammad, and he had an arousal script around gay male rape. That had been compulsive for 24 years. So he'd actually stayed in the same script and then done behaviors to act this out. And he was suicidal. So that it got to a point of, he had drug addiction and a whole lot of other issues, move everything to the side. This was what he started with, and this is what he was left with.
Yes.
And we sat there and I explained to him, I said, okay, we're going to look at a couple of minutes of one of the clips that you watch, and we're going to see what's going on. What, because you spend hours searching specific clips. We're going to look what's arousing, what's going on. We're putting on science goggles. Let's have a look. And we looked at it, and his lens and my lens were so different. So I saw, there was really, really tall guys with a really short, small guy that was made to look like he was younger. It was like that, where this isn't getting into, a minor look.
The erotic.
And it was like, and then I stopped it and I said, do you see this? Do you see what I'm looking at and what's upsetting for me? He'd never seen it.
No, because
it
his
had never
arousal
occurred
was
to
too
him.
high.
Gotcha. And he was like, oh my God, that's horrific. He was very, very distressed. And actually, we're now months later, he's never been aroused by it again.
Wow. That's a very quick intervention.
It's very much like EMDR.
Wow.
Where you bring the cognitive online. It's like they can't believe that they've watched this. And it's also been effective for clients who have compulsive porn.
Yes.
And it's like, what are you? You've desensitized, and now you're watching this. We'll look at a small minute. And they feel the shame. They feel they're not disassociated and aroused. Probably because they're watching it with me, and we're analyzing it.
You're watching it from a different frame.
From a more distant lens. And it's just been so effective that it was important I just bring this in.
Absolutely.
Because clients are lost in this arousal. And often don't sit back and consider what is arousing and how they really think about it. And bring the cognition, the cognitive side back online.
Bring that frontal lobe back online.
Bring the frontal lobe back.
Are you ready to move on?
Yep. Traumatic events are repeated and usually reversed in fantasy and sexual behaviors. The client who is the star in their erotic script triumphs over their perpetrators using anger, humiliation, vengeance, and retaliation and perversion to restore their sense of self. Erotic feelings are merged with shame and self-hatred. So we're getting into that area around eroticizing power and eroticizing people who are vulnerable. Right? If you think of this in terms of take the sex out, take the erotic out, this is the little kid, the little boy who's imagining that, he can be Superman to go and bash up the bullies at school or bash up his dad who's intimidating and frightening him. And we see that as totally normative, and it is.
Movies are written like
Disney loves this.
Well, I used to think of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. The critic. I mean, it's a full-on movie. Well, once only watched for me, but that moment where she actually does get revenge on the person who was abusing her. Right?
Absolutely. Right. This is a common theme in our human experience.
Absolutely.
We're just looking at this being eroticized.
Gotcha.
To try and make sense of it, because it is an ugly thought, and yet to hold that humiliation and rage and anger do get eroticized, and if people have poor self-esteem, and have experienced abuse in their history,
yes,
that they can have a strong desire for this.
yeah,
And it plays out in their fantasy world. And if people can speak about it, you know, it can be really, really helpful, because a lot of people have not acted out sexually or have done so and have felt immense shame and want to learn about how to stop it. You know, and we are now getting into the perpetrators of violence area.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and this just gives you a bit of a heads up on what to look for when considering clients who might experience eroticized rage. You know, enmeshment and entrapment with a caregiver occurring before the age of 5, punishment and physical violence in retaliation for separation attempts, participation by the other parent to encourage the entrapment, physical and sexual abuse, an unregulated limbic system, and, you know, erotic arousal is a product of an emotionally chaotic childhood, really. Clients notice the sex, but not the anger.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Traumatized males successfully compartmentalize violent, disturbing images of sexual aggression without having any empathy or feeling.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I see this time and time again. So people will come to see me and they'll be saying, what's the point? And we're watching it together, and just the look on their face, I don't believe I'm watching this. It doesn't fit with my belief systems at all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They completely don't see the violence in it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It makes a lot of sense, because people wonder, like, you know, lay people wonder how somebody could get off on aggression and could actually do this. And if you don't have empathy or sympathy for the victim, then the eroticism is the thing that's left, isn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
And if they're playing out humiliation or anger from their past, that's somehow the focus and just being aroused.
Yes.
They're not actually looking at the anger. They're not looking at anything else.
Yes, yes, yes.
And also just to be aware here, but if talking about this, so if this is coming up in assessment and you think, okay, we're going to go down this road, look for posture and eye contact that's dominating, and inappropriate statements with sexual content and confused meaning. Look, that happens a lot.
Tell me the confused meaning, please.
Well, I mean, stuff in terms of, well, you know, she obviously loves it, or a voyeur thinking that, you know, how could this be wrong when they're getting a view of me?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, the look on their face was one of like their pleasure and surprise, and I'm saying it's horror and terror, and fear. But you're reading things so wrong.
When you disrobed, it was horror and terror.
They read it wrong, and paradigms and victims notice that blame victims of abuse, and to frame questions that aren't so direct, but to give you some insight.
Yes.
So to say, what do you think around domestic violence? Have something more global.
Okay.
Start somewhere. What do you think's going on here?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right, and that can be really, really insightful down the road, especially if you're trying to get a sense of people experience shame and remorse or not, because treatment will depend on that.
Yes.
Okay.
Which I'm assuming that you will speak more on.
We're going to get to that. Okay. Are we all right with time?
We're doing great.
Okay. Right, courtship's distortions. So I said this has been conceptualized as intimacy is a problem with the sex play that most kids engage in, and that the various types like flirting, I'll show you yours, you show me mine, and rejection and then coming back and a rupture and repair, and these whole processes are where we learn all of this stuff, and we could break down courtships into various areas, and that when we experience rejection, humiliation, or we've had some sort of sexual abuse, or we might even conceivably have a personality disorder or something else that disables us from engaging in this kind of intimate play when we're kids, then we could have sexual problems where we get stuck in a particular stage.
Yes.
So it's just a way to think about this through the lens of an intimacy disorder. And there's a diagram that just outlines the various processes that would normally take place in a sexual interaction between two people, and they can get stuck at various stages. And now I've outlined just a few of the more problematic ones, which we can have a little look at.
Oh, beautiful.
So voyeurism, you know, visually orientated behaviors, including pornography, strip shows, and peeping. They're non-participants. is normal to enjoy looking at others, of course, sexually. When this means looking at people who do not know they're being viewed, then voyeurism becomes a problem. When it involves compulsive pornography use, voyeurism becomes isolating as well. They generally, people who are voyeurs generally venture into flirtation. You know, when doing assessments, ask them if they sit in strip bars much, lap dances, look for behaviors like that. It's the you show me yours and I'll watch. It usually means objectifying a person, becoming incredibly aroused by it. I think it's just important to consider when doing assessments to ask clients what their behaviors are, because if they've got this behavior, then you go down this road and look further down, because generally clients, unless they've built up a lot of trust with you, will not tell you exactly what they're up to.
They're not going to volunteer.
They're not going to volunteer it. So unless they've been charged. Yeah. Exhibitionism. Again, when looking at this in a very casual way, to say, do you like people noticing when you're on the beach, and then going, yeah, and saying, have you ever been caught naked? And then they might jump into, well, actually, yes, I have. And then the next step is, actually, I do it quite frequently in all sorts of places. So to actually lead, if you like, conversation questions to try and unravel and to try and get a sense of what clients may be doing. Yeah. And intrusive sex, obscene phone calls, frotteurism. Look, this is interesting because a lot of people don't consider obscene phone calls or rubbing up against somebody as being that bad.
The Tube in London.
I mean the Tube in London. Right, but they'll generally offer that to you.
Yes,
well, actually, I do that. Yeah. Right, and that's a real red flag.
Interesting. Yep.
That's giving you some information, but it may have gone further.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can then start to explore that.
Because normally, what our clients, will offer will be the watered down version of the real behaviors that are going on.
Absolutely, especially if there's shame or if there's not shame, actually, too. They're anticipating that you will look at them unfavorably and stop admiring them.
Yes.
So they'll give you the watered down version for that. But they won't consider, often, if you just say, do you ever rub up against people and get a bit of a thrill, and do you go and do it deliberately? They won't consider that that's intrusive.
Wow. Okay.
It hasn't crossed their mind, but that's severe behavior. So to ask around this stuff can be really helpful to find out what people are up to. They don't see it as predatory often.
All right, I'm going to throw something in here.
Yeah.
Major issue: dick pics.
Ooh. So if it's a way of, it could be like the shock thing. It could be very much fitting into this.
Unrequested, unsolicited.
Let's just bloody. Well, I should have said the word bloody, shouldn't I? But that's exactly what we're talking about. It's incredibly intrusive.
It's incredibly intrusive.
That's aimed to humiliate someone. Yeah. That's aimed to create some fear in somebody and to feel power. That's the bang that they get when they do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that falls in this
area. That's exactly falls into this area. And then when everything we've spoken about then moves into this next level. Right? And so we're really looking at, if people have said yes to a few of these things, like the dick pic, then you can start to move into this area.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Because really, in an assessment for sexual behaviors and disorders, we want to get a sense of what people are up to, so that we can treat them and keep the community safe, and see if they're doing anything illegal.
Yep. How far has it gone?
Yep. And see if there is remorse and guilt.
Yes. Yeah.
See if they really are up for changing their behavior, or if it aligns with them.
Yeah.
We want to find all that stuff out. So unfortunately, asking some of this harder stuff is needed to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look, and people are exploiting the vulnerable. Rape, of course, but to look at the less obvious ones, like seducing children or exhibiting professional sexual misconduct with clients. Look, that's a less obvious one, but I see quite a bit, where people in power in the workplace really are aroused by having people more vulnerable who work for them to do things that are humiliating or to be, and we've seen it, this used to be something that we'd see in the 50s and 60s on telly.
So pick up that for me.
And then everyone would laugh as she bent over.
Yeah.
But it is that stuff that I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've just had a client talk about, she's a female in the Defence Force, and this is very much currently going on in the Defence Force. So.
And to hold the difficult conversation that sits behind that, and that is that all emotions are arousing potentially.
Yes.
Right. But then we have a moral and ethical standard for ourselves, and society has one as well, which we filter through to get to do what we're doing.
Yes.
It's very interesting, though, when you put this into a group lens.
Yes.
And group norms change, like the Stanford experiment. So you can get groups of people doing behaviors which they wouldn't do individually, but you throw them into a group and they've done it.
And they've normalized
it. They've normalized it as a group. Yeah. So to look for that as well when people are talking about their experiences. But yeah, being aroused by people being vulnerable to you. This is definitely the most problematic area of the arousal system or template or script. If that's the theme that you're working with the most dangerous theme. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple of case studies.
Fantastic.
Do you want to jump off? If you want to jump off, because it's all been quite intense, but now we're pulling up a case study, which is even more intense.
Take a breath, a bit of a stretch.
Yeah. Okay, so Norman. So the name's changed, of course, and a few of the details have changed, so no one will ever be able to be identified. But this is just giving you an idea, right? So in this particular case, he'd had ritualized sexual humiliation by the siblings in his group. I actually spoke about him earlier.
Yes, I wondered, yeah.
Okay, so I've actually done this one, so to speak.
Yeah.
But just to look for when you're doing the assessment, look, the differential diagnosis, he did have PTSD. He had anxiety and depression. He definitely had that anxious, preoccupied attachment. The theme was to receive humiliation to reinforce his badness and experience attachment love through seeking redemption from confessing. So that's what he was after. That was the closest he'd ever got to intimacy, and he wanted to keep having it. The function of the compulsion was to experience the self as shameful and receive redemption. Voyeurism, exhibitionism, and pain exchange. So there was a lot of, he would go down to the beach, he'd go to public places and toilet blocks, and he'd take his clothes off or his pants off and have people see him and then get a power from that, and then place himself in a humiliating pose and have a sexual interaction as a result of that, ask them to call him names, ask them to hit him or strangle him. It was quite extreme. But I would like, I think I just want to say at this point, but he's recovered.
Oh, that's so good.
It's really, I wanted to put that in.
You can recover.
I wanted to put that in. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can recover. It's important.
I think it'd be hard. I think it's hard in this sort of practice work, so that sort of work and other psychology work, to do it if you think people don't recover. So it's great to actually have these great wins in this space.
Absolutely. A lot of this, I think, runs a course of like 12 to 18 months for people that see you quite, frequently, from twice to once a week.
Yeah.
And they get to the other end. Their self-esteem does improve.
Yeah, wow.
The compulsions are removed. A lot of the compulsions are removed by them having more of an understanding of why.
Yes.
Why seems so important to them.
Yes. Yeah.
Takes the automatic out.
Yeah. Brings in the frontal lobe.
Yeah. Brings in the frontal lobe. Next one. Okay, so Casey had been sexually abused by her stepfather, and she actually had married a man who physically resembled him. And she was engaged in a relationship where she would become aroused by abusing him. And then he would become angry with her.
Yes.
And then they would have sex.
Yes.
And then after the sex, they would be close for like a few hours.
Then the intimacy.
They wouldn't talk. They wouldn't sort of talk about what had happened. But they would. But the sexual connection was how they understood intimacy. And then they would go away, disconnect from each other, and he'd become more distant. And to get him back, she would be arousing her own anger and hatred. The
tolerance of the distance then, gets less and less and less, to the point where you do it all over again.
All over again.
Wow.
So the erotic stream is to humiliate and avenge her sexually abusive stepfather by attacking and forcing her husband to exercise power over her, to confirm that she's bad and wrong, which she interpreted as love. Yeah. Again, this particular woman recovered, if you like. It did mean divorcing.
Yep.
Because the relationship didn't have any foundation in it, really. That was not around abuse.
Yep.
And I want to hold with this, because it often happens that once you start looking at what with clients of why do you think this is going on, they bring so much on board.
Yeah.
Like she was able to say, well, yeah, he does remind me of my abusive stepfather. Yeah, I do initiate the fights. Yeah, I do find anger arousing. Yeah, I do. And she could name all of this stuff. And she's going, and I do arouse myself into this place. And I do want to humiliate him. And I do want to get back at my stepfather. And she could name exactly what was going on. And I think we've got to give clients a lot of credit, because they can.
They're wiser than we are.
They absolutely can. And she came in, she goes, I know I'm doing this, and I've got good understanding of why. She just wanted to verbalize it. And then work through it. Okay. Next one. Okay, Paolo. Look, this was an interesting one, because I've seen this come up 3 or 4 times now, right? So it's something that I'd never given much consideration to. But in this particular case, he was very enmeshed with his mother. His dad was incredibly violent, right? And he would do his mother was treating him more like a spouse than a son, and had too much intimacy. And he was trying to pull away from mum. It was a very, very disruptive home environment. He'd been diagnosed before he saw me with borderline personality disorder as well, and had depression and substance abuse issues, which are often comorbid. Look, what was going on for him was he was watching a lot of porn, and he was watching transsexual porn. And he could only be aroused when he understood that he wasn't being manipulated. And a woman wasn't able to be trusted, because his mum would come into too much and then go out, and he couldn't trust that she was just at a comfortable, safe, and they weren't sexual, but she was looking at him sexually and making sexual comments that made him feel icky. The boundary was very, very...
Well, she was in his intimate space.
So he just didn't trust. And his issue was, I can't trust. And so if there's a penis and it gets erect, I know that I'm not being deceived.
With my mother.
I'm not with my mother. Exactly. But he understood that he was heterosexual. And that this was distressing for him. And he had a lot of self-hatred, and it was reinforced by him desiring to see that the penis was erect, so that he could understand that he would feel safe enough to engage. So the only sexual experiences he'd ever had were with transsexuals, because he had never felt comfortable. And again, it's around believing clients when they come to you. 100%. This was not about saying I'm sexually attracted to transsexuals who are, he's saying I'm not attracted. And I don't understand what's going on here. And again, after sort of working through it, he really understood that he needed to develop intimacy and trust, and he had this construct of women as being manipulative and distant and calculating. He'd also spent some time in that incel group. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but there's a narrative out there of women are only after,
So incel is a shortening for involuntarily celibate. So for young men who are highly frustrated that they can't find a partner or find someone to have sex with, and so they consider themselves involuntarily celibate. And actually some of the mass shootings in America have actually been people who identify as incel. And Reddit seems to be full of a few incels as well. Reddit, the online kind of programmer chat space, seems to be full of it.
Absolutely piggybacks on the back of, patriarchal beliefs and
entitlement to women, men's entitlement to women.
Totally.
Yeah.
And even goes further into biology and sociology and goes back to caveman days and says basically women are only looking for the best meal or the best alpha, and everyone else is going to get passed over.
Fair that
and they're not interested in intimacy, connection or anything, or friendship or anything. So it sort of pulls it back to
very basic,
almost reptilian.
Yeah, almost exactly. Okay, lay their eggs and walk away.
Yeah, but that's a belief system that some men have, and I've seen this.
So you said about Paolo, you've seen about 4 of these. Is that somebody who's attracted to a transsexual woman? So that's a woman with penis.
They state that they're attracted to women.
Yes,
but they don't trust them, but this is the way that manipulated.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
And therefore, when they can get safe, they can go into arousal.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Once they get safe and once they understand.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, and it can be a strong and long philosophical discussion, because there is they really do sit in this belief that there's biology at play here, and then it's like yes, biology for reptiles.
Yes.
But
yes.
But it has to be really worked on. People do come with strong beliefs around this. You are working with a lot of patriarchy when you work in this field.
As a feminist, that's why I love you, Paul.
You really are. You really are. Okay, I've put this one in because and I've mentioned it earlier too, the personality disorder stuff. Because if you're not working with people, don't have shame. If they don't see the behaviors as ego dystonic, then the treatment outcomes are definitely poorer. Yeah.
So what you're talking about is kind of the person with almost antisocial personality disorder who has absolutely no remorse.
I am, and strangely, I think I see more of those than the average therapist.
Might be because we refer those ones to you.
But I definitely see quite a lot of narcissistic personality and antisocial personality.
You're very good with them, Paul.
Treatment outcomes aren't as good though.
No.
But it really is in the assessment to see if they do have shame, guilt, and remorse, and what their narratives and their constructs are around themselves, around women, around others, around their role. But this particular one I've put in because this is not completely uncommon.
No.
Right? So this particular client of mine would go to places where men and women were couples with their kids. He used to like going to, like, not necessarily McDonald's, but there was a, where you go to the salad bar and, what are those big places where you have steaks and salads and family.
Yeah, like the big kind of all you can eat.
Like an RSL.
Yeah.
Right. So he went to special ones which he really liked. And what he'd do is he'd go up and touch the woman on the backside or something and make sure the husband could see it. And so the husband's in the position now of defending the partner, and then he would punch the partner, the male.
Wow.
And that's where the eroticism was. So he'd like to see the male humiliated in front of the
so humiliate the woman and then humiliate the male.
Yeah.
And so he was obviously quite physically capable.
And spent a lot of effort into being physically capable. Yeah. And this is not that uncommon.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at men's violence against men, that this is there can be an erotic charge involved in this as well.
Yes.
And it can be about displaying their prowess to humiliate the men in front of women.
Yes. Yes.
And this shows up
because that's the ultimate shame.
That's the ultimate.
Because women are already at a low level of consideration. So the ultimate shame is to be the dominant male.
Absolutely. And in this particular case too, he was married, but he used to find younger women that he would then take into these environments, and then he'd have sex with them afterwards in the car or something in the car park.
Wow.
So he'd be using fear and intimidation there as well.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is not that uncommon.
Yeah.
It's really ugly.
It's very ugly.
But to not talk about it is doing us all a disservice.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's kind of underlying someone like this in your experience?
Okay. Well, I can tell you,
or
in his family system, his mother came from not a small, an ethnic group within the larger community here, and the mother was having sex with lots of men within that ethnic community,
Right.
so had brought shame on
And
the husband. The husband hung himself in the garage, and my client found him when he was 12. And he held a lot of rage towards his dad,
and then rage
for accepting mum's behavior, and also idolized mum for surviving the situation. And so, Dad, you should have been better.
Man. You should have been the man.
And Mum, you shouldn't have been doing this. And so he was attacking both. This was an attack at mum.
Men and women.
Yep. This is, I'm attacking mum and I'm attacking dad.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
When we looked at the arousal template, he has narcissistic personality. He also has antisocial, I'd say.
Oh, yeah.
He took it all in and went, yeah, it makes perfect sense, but it actually did nothing to change the behavior, because he had no concern about the behavior. It wasn't affecting his life in any way. Right. He came to see me because of his substance abuse.
Right. And how did he frame his substance abuse then?
He was using coke, and he was a coke dealer. And he was like, this is my main problem, and I think I'm using a bit much. Can you help me use it a little bit less?
Can we do controlled consumption?
Can we do controlled consumption? And in the assessment, we uncovered all of this, and a lot to do, and I think this is important, a lot to do with his presentation. So everything about him was sexual. So the tight-fitting clothes, the way he sat, a quick assessment of how, what his life was like, women all love me, this and that. He was basically saying, this is my issue.
Yes. Yeah.
He embodied
his body was saying.
Yeah. It was like, I'm talking about coke, but look at me.
We'll talk about coke.
There's something else going on.
There's a couple of lines I've got a problem with.
Exactly. But I wanted to include this because it does come up.
Yeah.
Well,
I think I was only just talking about this today with someone I supervise, where, in highly patriarchal systems where women are disregarded, the ultimate position of power is to humiliate and dominate another man.
Yeah.
For a man.
Yeah.
And so you see that, and so the sexual abuse of other men can go into that domination and power of other men to become the total alpha male.
Absolutely.
Because women are just discarded as irrelevant in that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And we see that in terms of as a weapon of war as well, in particular, cultures and countries. So men abusing men.
And it's I don't know how to frame this up, because this is subjective. I was going to say it's relatively frequent, but I think it might be.
I don't know. I think it's one of those things where it'd be hard to get the numbers. It's concerning. Yeah,
it's concerning enough for me to go, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, porn.
All right, that's another light topic for us.
Another light topic. Okay, so Pornhub 2019, 100 million viewers. I don't know what COVID did, but but Pornhub's become important because they're collecting all the data now.
They are.
And giving us all the stuff to read, and they're handing it over. So all of a sudden it's like, wow, we probably in the next 3 or 4 years will get some good data on what people are doing and what they're watching and so forth. Some of my data is a little bit old.
Because it moves very quickly.
Some of my data is a little bit old, but some of the things that just hold in mind, which are really worrying. The Tarrant one, 2011, first age to view porn, 11 years old. That's for UK.
It holds in America as well. The Pew studies have the same stats.
Right.
Data,
so it's really, really young.
10 to 11,
We just want to hold that it's really, really young. And 66% of the first time people see porn, they didn't want to.
No.
That's the other side of this. So, look, I just put in this quick case study. A family, a mum came and saw me about her son who they didn't know what was wrong for about 3 weeks, and he'd actually seen really aggressive, violent porn, and he was absolutely devastated that this is what mum and dad were up to, because he'd had some sex education. And now he's transposing what he saw onto the sex education mum and dad
do. So he's been taught this is normal.
This is sex education. Now I've viewed it, I've transposed one onto the other, and I can't look at mum and dad without being totally traumatized. And I don't think that would be that uncommon either.
No. Well, so some of the research I know about porn is 98% of porn that you find on Pornhub is physically, emotionally or sexually violent towards women.
Next page.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's big. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's absolutely moving into what was more soft porn is kind of just gone.
I think that's called Honey Burdette, isn't it? That's the ads.
Hardcore violent porn is the majority now. It has been normalized.
So choking.
Totally. Yeah. So harking back to we can talk about the desensitizing, but harking back also to from a trauma point of view, that disassociating, I'm not noticing the violence anymore. Yes. I'm just noticing my arousal, not what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the more explicit hardcore porn needed to maintain the sexual arousal. Look, if you'd get an opportunity, Mia Khalifa on the BBC, the doco, it was really, really good. She was a porn actress for, I think, 3, maybe 4 years, spoke about the industry and spoke about her concerns with the changing violence in the industry, and the type of sex men watch is the type of experience men want from the women in their lives. They expect constant desirability, and this is having a huge problem. So this is not necessarily anymore in this moment talking around the trauma lens. This is just a desensitizing,
it's the
normalizing
of our sexuality by the porn industry.
It's that. Yeah. And look, the one good part in that is that's easier to treat.
Yes. Good. That's
as an addiction,
yes.
Yeah. That doesn't fall back on this attachment style and the limbic system that's hyper aroused. So treatment is usually shorter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some of the Australian research coming out around porn is really coming from Marie Krabs, so CRABBE, I believe, and then Gail Dines is kind of one of the leading researchers in this space as well.
Right. So just more on it. Adolescents develop a sexual script for themselves by age 17. The age of their first sexual intercourse in the USA is 17. And nearly all had watched porn, males, and more than half of women. So just sort of backing on everything we've spoken about, I guess we're talking about a changing sexual landscape because of porn and changing sexual behaviors because of porn for everything we've just said.
Absolutely.
Look, positive effects of porn. So some stuff has come out. Partners who watch porn together experience less stress and shame. And women report more intimacy and closeness in relationship after viewing porn. I had to put it in because it's out there. Just to consider that it could be used therapeutically and that some people have good reports from it.
And there's actually a whole, there's a whole kind of industry around porn created by women for women, and also ethical porn as well, where there's a lot more, there's no violence and there's a lot more focus on like really work health and safety issues, which actually come up in the research when you research people who participate in porn stars. I hate that term, but
they use it as well.
But
and I don't know where this will all go, but just to throw that in,
absolutely.
But people are noticing from research some of this. Look, internet porn, the crack cocaine of sexual compulsion. As I spoke before, without that underlying trauma framework. So more a psychoed CBT based approach. And honestly, I think if you're working with people who come to you with problems with porn, you'll see more of this.
Yes. Yeah.
But in the assessments, which I'll get to look for what else could be going on. Okay, sexual play as a child, for example, may leave a person with unfinished experiences. As a person matures, they realize they no longer have an interest in that behavior, or that those experiences are no longer appropriate in adulthood. Yet a person might experience the right image or story, but is an absolute overlay of something unfinished from childhood. When that which is unfinished is accessed, the individual begins to search for more of the same genre. The person narrows their lens to focus on images that closely fit that unresolved, unfinished aspect of the sexual self. Clients report a phenomenon of a burned-in image similar to the intrusive images that PTSD clients describe. So just to look at how watching porn for someone who has experienced sexual trauma can be so different as opposed to the desensitizing process that someone who hasn't got a trauma background experiences. And that burned in image, when doing the assessment, they'll often describe that. Okay, treatment. Okay, client goals. Look, usually they come to seek help because they find the behaviours, or they're ruminating over the behaviours, really distressing, basically.
Yep. I love the fact they've been busted by partners.
Yeah, and I had to put that in because that's like a big part of my practice. And then I've got the other part of my practice. The other part is, the partners have busted me, or the law has.
Yeah.
Right. So you're getting both. Yeah. And with the second group, to really do an assessment on personality.
Yeah.
Because it really is.
The law has.
To really see though what's going on in terms of, do they have shame? Do they have remorse? What are their behavior? Are they ego dystonic or syntonic? What do they think about what they've done? Treatment safety and trust, most important variable. Have clients state their goals really clearly. When you do this at the beginning, clients will often say to you, not using the intimacy word because that's just maybe a little bit too scary, but they'll say things to infer it.
Like, I'd like to be closer
with someone.
Yes.
I would like to be able to have what they say. Often they'll say things like a normal relationship. Yeah. Right. I don't know what it is, but I want a normal one. I've seen it on television. I want that.
Must be.
But they often, the goals are relational and intimacy, which is really good for doing this work, because what their behaviors are distortions of that.
Yes, and obstacles to it.
Obstacles to it. Yeah. So have them, and then say, this is what we're working with them. Look at how long the time frames. Be really clear with people. A lot of people feel, especially with the amount of shame they feel, that there is no help. No one can do this. It won't get better. Yes. And it can get better. Definitely can get better. 6 months, 12 months, 18 months if there's strong PTSD, maybe longer. But to give people yardsticks and goals to look forward to and to understand that it can happen. Psychoed's really important on trauma. Explain to them what the arousal is like. Tell people that their arousal system, that they can go further with it, and that they've learnt ways to look after themselves through holding their breath and through numbing out, to actually care for themselves, and that they can go from, zero to hero in an aroused state where most people couldn't. And there's nothing essentially wrong with that, that was a learned survival behavior. Absolutely. There's nothing actually wrong with it at all. Self-compassion and pride, they successfully utilize this survival mechanism. And normalizing sexual compulsion is only part of this whole ritualized process that includes the arousal system. Right? There's a bodily and emotional response, there's thoughts, and there's behaviors. And not to privilege just the behaviors, the whole thing is just how you're managing yourself. Love, guilt, shame, fear, and anger are all present in normal arousal templates. And arousal is heightened by the tension created by these sometimes opposing emotions. The arousal of itself is not bad or evidence of pathology. It is the compulsion and the distress that's problematic. Screen for powerlessness, neglect, and deprivation. I don't have to really go into why anymore. I think we can just pull through it. Look at that. The first sexual experiences. People will often tell you when they've never been asked, oh my God, well, it was this. And so sometimes you don't even go further than that in finding the important burned in images or the script that's being repeated. And sometimes it isn't the first experience, and they'll come up with other ones later, but it's the one that's here.
The one that gets stuck.
It's the ones like this one. Look for what life was like in the family, humiliation, early sexual identity and beliefs, and parents' identity and belief and sexuality. Recognize the importance of shame. Strongly recognize this. Do not focus immediately on behavior modification unless there's a risk to themselves or others. Just go in the psychoed space of how trauma works in the body, that the behaviors are only part of this system. There's thoughts, there's feelings, and there's behaviors. And we all have them. And we've all been aroused by all of your emotions. It's just a problem if your core belief is that there's something really wrong and you're a bad person. So we're looking at really self-hating beliefs. Discuss how those beliefs are formed. Pre-verbal, when we're young.
Constant repetition,
repetitive neglect. I've often found that when clients do this on the session after we've uncovered that the family system wasn't fantastic, they'll come in defending the family system.
Yes, because that's all they had.
Yeah, and they'll say, but I was, they did this, and I'm remembering this good moment, and I'm remembering this, and I'm remembering that, in the hope that they can retain their belief that they're the bad one that needs fixing. And to stay in that and just go, okay, well, give me more, but that this is still something that what you told me happened.
So it's both.
It's both.
It's and, not either or.
And throw in the normative word a bit sometimes with people too, because I know we're not using it clinically with them, we're using it relationally. Like, no, it's not normal for a mother or a father to do that. In a repetitive way.
Absolutely.
Right. I think that's completely fine. Explore with clients their erotic script, staying curious, ask lots of questions about what they feel and what they think of the various actors, including themselves in the script. That can really stump them and that can be really helpful.
What do you mean I have to think about that?
You think about the person that's in that thing that I'm doing this to, or they're doing to me. What do you mean consider them? And then think about what they're thinking.
That person
completely. You've lost, and then bringing in the players, bringing in the feelings. That can actually have a huge and quick change
when you bring the other person's perspective into and you have more than one, and that seems like a similar process to watching the porn with them.
Absolutely. Put the science goggles on. Cognitive dissonance with the science goggles approach. What's going on there? Why are you looking at that? What do you reckon she's thinking? What's he doing that for? That sort of stuff. Be mindful that clients stay within a window of tolerance and watch for symptoms of disassociation. And I guess we don't have to go further into that. Most of everyone here, nice little, they can listen, they can hear, but they're not staring, but they haven't gone numb, they're not blanking out, all of that. Make the connection, processing erotic rage, make the connection clear for clients between the object of their original rage and their need to reenact it with people in their current lives. This can be a particularly difficult process. Look, psychoed is an important component in this, but if you slow it down, I've often find that clients can't justify the next step. They get stuck in their own cognitive process and have an aha moment and go, my God,
what have I been doing?
What is this? I can't justify it to you. So slow the whole process down. It can be incredibly distressing for clients. So therefore, this is the moment where I'm working with men who have strongly entrenched patriarchal women-hating views who have to get to that point and look at me in the eye and they can't go further. And then they just completely break. PTSD, sexual acting out, lack of insight and empathy can look like personality disorders. So people who are actually in this traumatic raged state and are eroticizing their rage, it can look like they've got these particular other disorders. But through actually working through it, you uncover that they're just so defended in this this state of anger that they have never brought their cognition online, and they have so much shame that they can't even face what they've done. Okay, I would add here the meth. ICE is in the community, and when people do that particular drug, they can show up and look psychopathic, antisocial, narcissist. They can look everything. And sexually, you could diagnose them really quickly. So be mindful and do screen for it and ask. Right. Yeah, adaptive processing information. Well, look, that's essentially what I was speaking about earlier, which is doing work which actually brings the cognitive process back online with the arousal system. So both are present with you whilst you're working with them, because they're used to disassociating into the arousal system and they haven't looked at anything. So treatment is about bringing the cognitive processes back online. You know, our attachment style modeling, rupture repair, rupture repair, rupture repair.
Owning your own kind of failings as a
all the time. Rupture repair, rupture repair. So, you know, be brave with being different. Be brave with the conflict being there. And be brave in the capacity for people to change their capacity to regulate themselves and come back into connection with you. And it might be the first time that they've done this successfully.
That they've had repair. Anything.
It might be the first time. Look, I've run groups. I've found groups have been incredibly supporting. Process groups, of course, and psychoed groups. Psychoeds, if people don't know really much about their trauma or have any comprehension of their compulsions and obsessions, and then process groups if they've got some underlying structure there. Somatic therapists, massage therapists, sex therapists, you know, a lot of people have gone to the next page. I think I speak more about it. No, I'll just talk about it. A lot of people have real problems with physical touch in terms of intimacy. So they've either never had sexual experiences, they have, but only in objectifying, in aggressive ways. So to actually experience and learn how to be vulnerable enough to have pleasure and feel pleasure can be incredibly, what's the word?
Confronting.
Well, it can be confronting.
Incredibly confronting.
Thank you. Thank you.
And even just the pleasure, you know, and when you're saying pleasure, not necessarily sexual pleasure, it can be that pleasure of massage where someone's just like, you know, massaging your arm and the feeling of hands on body. Absolutely.
Or to feel a little bit of sexual pleasure in physical touch. And just to note it. So look, re-scripting the arousal template, this is important. Most clients do want help. They want to stop doing whatever they're doing, but they also want to have something else. They usually want something around relationships, something around intimacy. So work with them. What does this look like? You know, be honest with clients too. You're not going to be able to change everything. You're not going to. You know, you're still going to be aroused by certain things, by certain feelings, by certain experiences that might be distressing and have been distressing in the past, and they're going to be there with you. But that doesn't mean that the same process that brought you to that point, you can now use to take you further. And with a bit of awareness, there might be areas where you steer clear of, you know, or you can work with a partner to say, okay, this is how it is. How can I incorporate this and you help to keep me safe? Look, a lot of clients I see have, I was going to say gender. No, I didn't mean that. Body dysmorphia, right? I've seen a lot of males who don't have anorexia but have bulimia. A lot of men who take steroids.
A lot of kind of high energy CrossFit, push yourself to the point of injury.
It seems to be really common in this.
Pre-workout, high caffeine use.
Absolutely. I definitely see a lot of that, and where they really do not have a good sense of themselves physically, and doing all sorts of social experiments, like getting them to dress differently, go out into the public. Like for clients who have no sense of themselves sexually, who cannot even imagine someone being aroused by them. It's an impossibility to actually go to DJs and get someone to help them choose an outfit. Nice. And then they've got to, you know, come back and say, did you ever notice anyone looking at you? Did they look for more than 2 seconds? Did anyone smile? Did you feel anything? And sometimes people say, I actually got my mouth went dry, or my heart beat a little bit, or my toes curled under. I'm saying that's sexual attraction. There you go. You know, so people have
lovely.
no concept that this is possible for them.
Yeah, yeah. And no awareness that those things actually are arousal and
Yeah,
excitement and
yeah.
healthy and yeah.
So baby steps through that.
Yeah.
So, you know, getting clients doing exercises, paying attention.
Yeah, yeah.
Focus on anything on improving their self-worth. So we're looking at relationships, we're looking at intimacy, we're looking at challenging distorted or unhelpful belief systems. We're looking at developing areas of competency in their lives, all the normal CBT stuff. Yeah. Okay. This is a little bit smaller, but print. Sorry, guys. Focus on developing insight for clients on how their self-hating beliefs and dysregulated arousal systems were formed. Demonstrate how they habitually position themselves in relationships to others to allow for the dynamics to exist where their beliefs are confirmed and can be eroticized. And this is really important too. Be clear with a client that this is a death of a major part of their current erotic lives. And that they may never achieve the intensity and excitation that their hyper-aroused compulsions provided.
That to me feels a lot like, you know, the addiction paradigm of someone with heroin saying goodbye to that level of high, that level of farewell to the world, you know, in that sort of way. And and try and making peace.
And making peace
and making the alternative as good as possible so that it's worthwhile staying in the alternative.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So important.
And give that to clients. Say that, look, you know, it probably, well, more than probably won't be as good. It won't be that, it won't be aroused by danger, fear, intensity in that way. When a person's eroticism is based on hateful self-beliefs, they develop, you know, and they develop self-compassion and self-worth, they'll possibly face an existential sexual or erotic crisis. They won't feel so sexual. There's this period of like, well, what do I do now?
How do I be a sexual being?
Yeah. And that really happens when I gave Ford that example of when I looked at the porn.
When you put the porn
together. Yeah, when clients do that, it's often bang.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, there's nothing else.
They must feel like they're free float, like they're free falling without the bungee cord or the parachute.
It's not like they lose that and then they're erotic. There's nothing else.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
It's just, and it's a real, it feels dead, I've heard people say. So they may come to the realization that maintenance and improvement of their self-worth and their erotic lives are now incompatible. Because when negative core beliefs have been eroticized, clients will instinctively attempt to preserve them at any cost.
A wee bit of self-sabotage.
A wee bit of self-sabotage.
2 steps forward, 1 step back. You know.
Especially once they've done some psycho ed and gone, oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah. And
then they've gone through this dead space of, well, what do you want now?
Yeah.
And then in that, you'll look for the self-sabotaging. I've gone through some of the exercises. They often have poor foreplay and social skills. You know, explain to clients what foreplay looks like. They look at you, you look at them, you smile, they smile back. How do you know if someone's interested or not? You know, a lot of this stuff they haven't even considered. More of the same, but now we're getting more into that humanist therapy. I'm trained as a Gestalt therapist as well. So the speaking to the different erotic parts of yourself, the disavowed parts, experiment with improving attractiveness to others. A lot of this embodied change, which can be very healing from the trauma perspective as well, to try and help them feel more comfortable and confident to build intimacy. Look, there's not a lot of evidence-based treatments out there. There's really not. There's really not. Look, EMDR's done a little bit on this, which is really promising and does segue into what I was talking about before.
Early with the dual awareness process.
It's sort of working on that. Look, something on SLA and SAA, that's Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous and Sex Addicts Anonymous. Look, just to say, it basically works with more existential and spiritual needs. It may not be so beneficial for clients who come with eroticized religious self-hating beliefs, etc.
Yeah, I agree.
And it may not be so helpful for clients who experience a lot of shame and self-hatred because of their behaviors. And so I've had mixed results. I've had clients who find the connection with others who share similar histories comforting, but I've also found clients who've experienced an immense amount of shame and increased self-hatred and alienation. So
yeah,
just to be mindful of that. And this space also is I suppose the largest or most privileged space in this area.
say some more about that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of the religious and the right wing have seen this sexual behavior through a lens of what God does or doesn't want, a religious God,
Yes.
usually Judeo-Christian.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you went to a SLA meeting, they'd finish on one of the Christian prayers.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's important to know.
Yeah. So it's definitely not going to work for all clients, and it's definitely not working at it from the place where I am. And I'm really clear with clients that I'm not actually going to ask that you pray to a God to have the compulsions removed. I'm not going to ask.
You're not going to submit to a higher power.
Yeah.
Because a client of mine goes to SLA and she's not religious at all, but she says goddess and she has her own version.
But
it's more around what you're saying is the submit to a higher power you don't think is so functional.
Well, I work from a more science-based lens.
Rather than a spiritual,
the
higher power will help you out lens.
That makes sense. And the this particular space around sexual compulsions and sexual disorders, there's a hell of a lot of clinicians who are quite religious and come from that background in this space for some reason. This isn't having a crack at anyone for being religious or for being spiritual, but just to say that that there's a hell of a lot of people who have those views who work in this field, and that may not work for all clients. That's all. Okay. Yeah. Scary. It's scary.
That was me in the shower this morning.
How much time have we got?
We're pretty getting close to time.
Okay,
I feel like we've done such a good job of nailing.
I'm going to be really fast with this then. Go. Okay. Look,
it's a perfect thing to end on.
Look, you can do it if you want. I just to know that if you're working from a trauma perspective in a deeply relational way, you're doing the work. You're doing it. That's the most important thing. If you're aware of how the body responds and reacts to trauma and you relate to someone with that knowledge, you're doing it. Just one little point, I have found it really helpful. Before it all begins, we say to clients, look, if you're really, really distressed, would you like me to put my foot on your foot and talk to you? And it's amazing how many clients go, that sounds like a great idea. And somehow the foot seems to be less intrusive and yet can be a little bit grounding.
So like when they're distressed, you do, I love it.
My foot's there. I'm just talking to them. My foot's right there. We're in the room right now.
I love it.
It may be helpful. It's just something that I found clients go, yeah, I like that one.
That's really good.
Okay. Quickly. And you don't have to do it. That's the next one. You don't have to do it.
You don't have to.
Okay. Will we finish there?
Well done. Yeah, that's
okay.
Brilliant.
There are a few more that everyone can see on the slides. Just finishing up.
Yeah.
I think the one thing I'd like to say, just to finish it off, is around the legislation.
Yes.
That if somebody discloses that they had an intent to view or watch child pornography, that is a criminal offence.
Absolutely.
It's in the intention. So to be really clear with clients around this, if your intention was to view this, then that is the criminal offence. Right. I didn't get to speak more around that yucky world, but I think that's the most important little piece. And I've got a few slides.
So the intention to search, the intention to look.
The intention
to seek the information is the criminal offence.
That's the criminal offence.
Whether you find the information or not.
Yeah. And the last one, but I think is important here, is around pedophilia, because it does show up, is that a lot of people have seen images of younger people that they thought, oh my God, maybe I'm a pedophile. And to have a discussion with people and say, well, actually, to be aroused by people who have got secondary sexual characteristics, that's not pedophilia. That's actually quite normal, but it's our cultural, ethical, moral boundaries which protect us from hurting vulnerable people, that stop us from acting this out. And there's a really good example when the Olsen twins in America were 17, there was a clock. It's so disgusting. There was a clock in New York that was counting down the minutes to their 18th birthday, so all the men could look. Because this idea that you're not allowed to look and now you can look. 18, so it's like, well, that's just not how biology works. But some clients do come to you really, really distressed that they may have this in their template. And in a quick discussion, you find that they don't at all.
And so much form fetishizes young girls and schoolgirls.
So much of that.
All that sort of stuff.
But I have had suicidal clients with this. So it's really important to listen to people and say, what is it you're looking at? And so forth. I've had 2 clients who actually attempted suicide because they feared it. So it's not something that people talk about. Okay, and I do have some slides that go into more detail about that. Look, thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to throw it open to the group.